Hi Atari friends, this is a surprise video for my friends from the Antic Podcast show, Randy Kindig, Kevin Savitz, and Brian Arnold. If the show was recorded back in the early 80s and I was listening to it, I would probably listening to it this way. So this is the first episode of the Antic. Let's put it on the tape. Push play. Switch off the Atari computer. Switch it on where the start key is pressed. And let's load the show. It only took 3 minutes to load.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast.
On this first episode of Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast, we talk about the first Atari to be installed on the Navy submarine, 2 recent books about the Atari computers. Are there really millions of ET carts buried in a landfill in New Mexico? And which Atari computer is the prettiest? All that and more. Let's go. Alright, hello everyone. My name is Randy Kindig, and we want to welcome you to the first episode of Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to talk about the vintage Atari 8-Bit line of computers. We're going to cover news, talk about Atari computer history, present interviews, discuss the various Atari 8-Bit computers and their capabilities, and even delve into technical topics such as display list interrupts or some of the special chips in the Atari 8-Bit line. Mainly, we want this to be fun for everyone. Even if your favorite computer is the Apple II or the Commodore 64 or some other vintage computer, we want you to be able to learn something about Atari computers and why they hold a special place in our hearts. I'm just one of your hosts for this podcast. First of all, I want to welcome Kevin Savitz. Kevin, hello, and please tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you're located, how you originally became involved with Atari 8-Bit computers, and a little bit about your Atari collection.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kevin Savitz. I live in picturesque Portland, Oregon, and I am an Atari 8-bit computer nut. Let's see, my dad bought an Atari 800 when I was in 6th grade, and that was my first love. I mean, it was literally the first thing that I just adored, and I guess I never fell out of love with it. Dad and I did everything with that machine. Typed in games from magazines and called BBSs, played a lot of Jumpman and Mule, and and that just started my love affair with Atari computers. As for what I have every one of the Atari computers, 8-bit machines. At least one right on my desk right now next to my Mac. There's currently a 1200 XL, which I got at a thrift store a few weeks ago for $10, along with a Gyrus cartridge, so that was exciting. And I have a few very rare 8-bit items and a huge cartridge collection, so 8-bit all the way. People may know me as the guy who runs a couple of Atari-oriented websites. I run AtariMagazines.com, which I started like 15 years ago or something, that has the full text of Antic and Start and a lot of articles from compute and creative computing. And I also run AtariArchives.org, which has the full text of many Atari-oriented books. And last year I wrote a book called Terrible Nerd, which is about, it's a memoir about my love of technology, and it has a drawing of me on the cover holding an Atari 800.
Kevin, I have your book. I love it. I'm still in the middle of reading it, but I can't wait to finish it. So next we have a gentleman from the Atlanta area, Brad Arnold. Brad, tell us a little bit about yourself, your history with Atari 8-bits, and about your Atari collection.
Well, I got my first Atari 800 in 1981 when I graduated from a particularly difficult Navy computer school, and that was kind of a present to myself for finishing. And it was a 16K Atari 800. I upgraded up finally a little at a time up to 48K and about the $500 floppy drive. My current Atari collection is a little bit of here, there, and yonder. Actually, sitting here next to me, I've got my an Atari 800 and an ATR 8000, which I've picked up recently and playing with. But I've probably got one of every one of the computers, but I'm not sure if they all work yet. And although my cartridge collection is not too good at the moment, I do have a lot of disc-based games, and especially I have a fondness for the old SSI war games, so I have a lot of those.
Before we go on, Brad, when we were talking at the Vintage Computer Festival Southeast, did you tell me that when you were in the Navy, you had an Atari with you on a submarine?
Yes, yeah, I took my Atari 800 to sea one time on my ship, and at least for that particular ship, I was the first. At least he got something, but actually I'm not sure that's something I would admit to. But
That's an interesting story, Brad. That's pretty cool. I'm going to move forward here. My name is Randy Kindig, as I mentioned before. I host another vintage computing podcast called Floppy Days, which is a more general vintage computing podcast and covers all vintage computers. I hail from the Indianapolis area and have been involved with vintage computers for about 5 years. My first computer really was a TRS-80 Model 1 with 4K of RAM and 4K of ROM. I remember that distinctly in 1979. But my first real computer, not to say the Model 1 wasn't a real computer, was an Atari 800, which I got around 1981. I loved the color and sounds, neither of which the TRS-80 supported. I remember buying my first floppy drive for that computer and thinking how great that was. And I eventually upgraded to an Atari 800 XL, which I had until I later moved to the Atari 16-bit line. I even submitted an article or two to Antic and Analog magazine, which never got published. My collection isn't as large, it sounds like, as Kevin's and Brad's, but I do have a 400, an 800, 800 XL, 65XE, a drive, a couple of cassettes, a printer, and a pretty large collection of Atari books, magazines, and software cartridges and discs. So that's me, that's us. Welcome to the first show.
I hope I can talk my parents into buying me an Atari 800 XL.
Oh, tell them all the things it can do for you.
Right, I'll tell them it's got 256 colors and 4 stacks.
Sorry to interrupt you guys. The full episode is on tape, so it was just nice to show the way that you could hear the Antic Podcast back in the 1980s. Thank you for watching this video, and until next time, enjoy your Atari.